On this episode of WarDocs Podcast, Colonel Carl Savory shares his remarkable journey from serving as an infantry officer in Vietnam to becoming a pioneer orthopedic surgeon and establishing medical support for Delta Force. He reflects on the lessons learned from significant military operations, including the Iranian Hostage Rescue Mission and the Beirut Barracks bombing. Dr. Savory also discusses his ongoing contributions to military medicine and the value of relationships formed during service. For further information about Colonel Savory and our previous guests, visit our website at WarDocsPodcast.com. And be sure to follow WarDocs on your preferred podcast platform and subscribe to our WarDocs YouTube channel.
Welcome to WarDocs, the military medicine podcast. This show brings you a first-hand, behind-the-scenes look into the mission, unique opportunities, and deployed experiences of the entire military healthcare team. From state-of-the-art hospitals in the United States to the most austere environments across the globe, WarDocs has you covered.
Welcome to WarDocs. Today's guest is Colonel Retired Carl Savory. Dr. Savory had a truly remarkable career in uniform and after he retired. I'm your host, Major General Retired Jeff Clark. Dr. Savory, welcome to WarDocs.
Thank you very much, General.
Thank you for being a guest. So let's start a few years ago. Carl, you graduated from West Point in 1967 as an infantry officer, and then you deployed to Vietnam after airborne and ranger school as a long-range patrol infantry platoon leader with the 173rd Airborne Brigade. Could you tell us a little bit about your experiences in Vietnam and how that may have influenced your career as a medical corps officer?
I actually, when I went to Vietnam initially, I was a platoon leader with the 173rd, and then later I became a long-range patrol platoon leader and operations officer with what became Charlie Company Rangers, which was a field force long-range patrol unit. So we were essentially an independent operating unit. And so there was a lot of responsibility. I actually was basically the commander of it. We were commanded by a major who did not deploy forward with us. And we had 4 long-range patrol platoons, each of which had 6 patrol units in it. So we had our own aviation section. So there was a lot of organization and things going along, and it was a very significant experience because I was fairly new to the Army and had a lot of responsibility. And I think that I gravitated toward that. A fortuitous thing that happened is I ran into a classmate of mine who had been in country 4 months and was getting ready to go home. I'd been there 11 months and still was not looking to go home. And I'm going, wait a minute, tell me what you're talking about, Mike. And his name was Mike Casey, and he went to medical school, and he was on they had a program, the 112 program, where you could go to medical school like you went to graduate school. So it got me thinking. I had not really thought about medicine since I entered the academy. I didn't know that it was difficult to get in medical school or that it was a process. On my way between Vietnam and going to Germany, I stopped in Tucson, which is where the University of Arizona has a medical school. And I went to see my parents, and I decided, well, I'll go see the dean and tell him I want to come to medical school. And when I started, it didn't work that way. And it was really, I think, divine intervention. The dean, I made an appointment with the actual dean, and he said, "Have you talked to the dean of admissions?" No. And so I went down, and the dean of admission turns out was a Naval Academy graduate who'd been in the Marine Corps and had gotten out of the service and gone to medical school. And I think that they just took pity on me because I was so ignorant. And I got into medical school. And
That's excellent. That's a great story. So you did go on to attend the University of Arizona
I did.
School of Medicine on an HPSP scholarship, as I understand it.
Yep.
Graduated in 1974, and then you did a surgical internship and orthopedic residency at Letterman Army Medical Center in San Francisco, California. And what a great institution, what a great academic medical center. Many in our audience may not be familiar with Letterman. It was closed in the 1990s. But my question is, why did you choose to be an orthopedist?
Well, I started out along when I was in Vietnam. I had an encounter with a vascular surgeon, and I was going to be a cardiothoracic and vascular surgeon. And when I went to medical school, I rotated on the orthopedic program, and I identified more with the orthopedists, Dr. Leonard Peltier and Dr. Bob Volz, who were pretty famous orthopedic surgeons at the time. And I kind of identified with them, and I decided to change. And then when I got to Letterman, I was fortunate enough to obtain an orthopedic residency out of my internship, which was a little bit unusual. At the time, the policy for the military, for the AMED was, you spent a year out in the field or being a GMO for a couple years before you got a residency, particularly in orthopedics. But because I had been an infantry officer, I think they felt like I understood the Army. Well, I've been the infantry officer for 4 years.
So you finished your residency and then were assigned to what was then Womack Army Community Hospital at what was then Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, North Carolina. You were the chief of orthopedics, but full-time job. But in addition to that, at the request of the Army Surgeon General and the Delta Force commander at the time, Colonel Charles Beckwith, as an additional duty, you established the medical support for Delta Force. And I'd like for you to please talk about that. But many folks may not be familiar with Colonel Beckwith. He's truly a legend. So if you could talk a little bit about him and then talk about how you planned and designed the medical support for special ops.
I'm going to back up a little bit. Originally, I was assigned to Fort Ord, and right before we'd gone down to look at a house in 17 Mile and Carmel, and it was the premier assignment. I got my orders changed, and I was livid. I did not know at the time when I got to Fort Bragg. I was told that one of the reasons that I had my orders changed was that they wanted me to be involved in this ultra secret double probation type of organization. And was I interested? And by that time I was there, and I was coming out of residency, and I became the chief of the busiest medac orthopedically in the country, or in the Army. So I said yes, and anyway, it all kind of evolved, and it started. Craig Llewellyn apparently had been tasked by the Surgeon General at at the time. Delta was ultra secret, and Charlie Beckwith, it was his vision. He recognized that we needed a counter or anti-terrorist force, probably before other people did, and he had basically patterned it after the British SAS. And when about a year after they stood up, some people from the British command came over, and he said, "Well, what do you think?" And they said, "You got a great system here. You're going to have," and this was his quote. He told me, he said, "They told me I was going to have a tactical success, but a strategic failure because I had no medical support." So a group of us met. The Delta at the time was housed in the old jail, and there were only about 60 people or 90 people, I guess, in the unit at that time. There were two medics, Jack Joplin and Kent Brown. They were squadron medics. There was no other support from the medical aspect. And anyway, I sort of filled a vacuum because I was the ones assigned there, and they did. George Hammond was assigned with me, or for me, to be my XO. He was assigned to the 18th Airborne Corps, and we were tasked by Beckwith. He said, "I want you to support Delta's mission in training, in real world, whatever we do. We want quality medical support." I don't think he really had a clue what when they really needed, and he just said, get it done and don't screw it up. He didn't say screw it up. He like me had orthopedic or had Tourette's, so he used a lot of colorful language. He's really a character, a man of vision from Georgia. He would played football at Georgia. He was sort of a hero or not a well-known special forces operative. Allegedly had taken a 50 caliber round and survived, and he was the Florida camp commander when I went through Ranger School. So I ran into him again, and Reader's Digest used to have a column called "The Most Unforgettable Character You've Ever Met," and he's in my top 10. Anyway, that kind of evolved, and we started to train, and there was I had no experience, no direction, and really no idea. So I had to come up with the concept of how we were going to support them, what we were going to support them with, and we had to train and equip. All of the unit at that time, all the medical support of that unit was extra duty. It was off the books, kind of black, ops type thing. Guys were volunteered to do this, and we were all over the United States, so not everybody was at Fort Bragg. So when we had any exercises or missions, I tailored and called in people, and it took a while to get the equipment. And at first, and this is where I think my experience in Vietnam helped me, I had some credibility that might not have been there because initially they wanted us as far away from the unit, and they didn't want us to just be in the crisis site, and they didn't want this and they didn't want that. They just wanted to have medical support if they needed us, and to be sort of like a redheaded stepchild. That was one of Beckwith's famous quotes that I loved. But that changed. I used to spend a lot of time there every day. And then I had a couple of injuries and I operated on them, and we got closer and closer. And as I got closer and closer, the entire unit, which I called initially the MAP, which is the Medical Augmentation Package, then it became Delta Med. And then they started to depend on us and want us in the area. And one of the things that I learned in this was a lot of commanders don't know what they need. They don't want to have to deal with it. And when we were getting ready to go to Iran, for instance, there was a lot of oversight in everything except my area. In the briefings, it goes, "Doc, we okay?" "Yep." And that was it. And I realized then that, and sometimes not every doctor is a doctor that they wanted. And as we pointed out, we were really gearing toward trauma, because we were not, as I told somebody one time when they wanted all this cardiac cath stuff, I said, "We're not raiding an old folks home. This is trauma, and we need to have the very basics of what we need. And we're not going to do neurosurgery in a back of a deuce and a half. That's not what we're there for."
Right.
And the concept was a little different in the fact that we were going to be forward with some fairly sophisticated capabilities. And later on, I think that was something that caught the attention of the command and ultimately became a forward surgical teams.
Yeah. You referred to it briefly, but you were the chief medical officer for the Iranian Hostage Rescue Mission in 1980, as I understand it.
That's correct.
A lot of this is things that you've described are coming together at that point. Can you tell us a little bit about this mission, and specifically there were lessons learned, I'm sure, from that?
There were a lot of lessons learned from the operational standpoint. A lot of what we have today came out of the failure of our mission.
Could you give us just a brief overview of what that mission was? Some folks may not be familiar with what that.
Right. in November of 1979, we had just completed a real-time exercise for the National Command Authority to become, I'm talking we, the unit, Delta, and we had an exercise that took 3 days, and, it was a hostage rescue thing, airplane seizure type thing. And the day that we woke up, uh, following the exercise, the embassy in Tehran was seized by radicals and whatnot. So then, from that day on, we went into planning, and there were lots of different plans. But basically, the plan that came out was a very complicated plan to go in and rescue the hostages. It had a lot of significant limitations placed on it by the administration at the time, Mr. Carter. He didn't want to send the 82nd in and seize the airfield and whatnot. He wanted a surgical strike, and Delta was chosen. And we trained and we trained up until April, and then we had no major accidents in the train up. And at this time, we were training. I was learning how to reconfigure a C-141 so we could operate on it. We had, as the medical team, we had tried various things before this. I probably am the first person ever in the history to have an IV started in a helicopter flying at low level with the person administering the IV stick with night vision devices. And we learned a lot. These were early night vision devices, no depth perception, couldn't see the blood. But we learned that we could do it. We learned that we could operate on C-130 or a C-141 if it was configured correctly. So we'd done some of that on the run up. And so anyway, it evolved that the plan was quite complicated. The medical portion of the plan, we had at our forward support base, which was in Wadi Kenya, Egypt, we had set up a small OR, and one of the PAs stayed there. All of the other medical teams except me were on two C-141s that were configured to do surgery. We had general surgeons, vascular surgeons, and whatnot, anesthesia. We had one of the PAs was assigned to the Rangers that were going to seize the airfield where we were going to be exfiltrated from had we been successful. At Desert One, I was the only medical person other than the squadron medics, and they had taken on a different role because of the shortage of personnel. They were actually had a role as in the operation of it. So I was the only one there when the accident happened. And a lot of people think that the mission failed and was canceled because of the accident. It's not that. The accident occurred because the mission was canceled. And when they were reconfiguring or moving the aircraft so that we could get out, one of the helicopters, when they pulled pitch, apparently the pilot got vertigo, lost the vision of the ground guide, and instead of banking to the left, banked to the right, and put the rotor blade through a fully loaded C-130 with 50 or 60 Delta guys on board. Well, not that many, about 50. And there were 8 people killed, the air crews primarily. It's amazing that we did not have that significant of casualties from the unit itself, Delta. Part of that had to do with their incredible discipline and getting off the airplane in an orderly fashion. And it turned out that we had one serious burn casualty and the rest of 7 or 8 minor things. It could have been just the opposite, where we had, mass casualty situation, which, quite frankly, we hadn't planned for that. This was supposed to be a refueling operation, and that's all. And so it went from, high point of our lives when we launched to the low point of my life, when it failed. I have to say that I learned a lesson about focus. I knew that someone was on the roadblock that had lost their radio, and they were pulling out, and I didn't think that he knew, and I spent more time going to get him and pulling him back than I did the casualties. I never even saw them. They were on different aircraft. They were just kind of pulled hither, and then the aircraft were taken off. And I actually, for a while, thought I was going to get left, uh, along with the roadblock team that I went after, with, in a Jeep with a Colonel Jesse Johnson, and I went after them because I said, they don't know we're going. They don't know we're leaving. But that's not what my job should have been. And I've beat myself up pretty good about it, but in point of fact, it probably made absolutely no difference based on the fact that the casualties were not that serious, and they were spread out, uh, and we didn't. There was no collection point. We didn't have any of that. But believe me, I preached that a lot in
I bet.
my
Yeah.
nightmare.
Well, thank you for sharing that and for sharing that lesson learned. So you served as the first Delta Force surgeon, some of which I think we've talked about, and as the first command surgeon for Joint Special Operations Command JSOC,
Yes, I did.
both significant positions of a legacy that good friends of mine have gone on to serve in those positions. I never had the opportunity, but good friends of mine did. And so the Forward Surgical Team, which is now pretty much, I grew up, Forward Surgical Team, that's just what we did. I mean, that was just an accepted part of how we provided medical support. But it was a new concept when you briefed the Army Surgeon General back in the 1980s. Can you tell us a little bit about that concept and how that evolved from a concept into reality?
Well, I'd love to say that I had a lot to do with it, but I think my input into it was very brief and at the beginning. But what happened is that when we failed, um, there we were not quite as secret as we were before the failure.
Now, you talked about the Iranian
After
hostage.
we failed with the Iranian Hostage Rescue
Right.
Mission, and we immediately after the failure started to train up to go again. And of course, JSOC, there was a Holloway Commission came out, and there was a lot of things that came out of it, and Joint Special Operations Command was one of them. But right around that time, Health Service Command, there was a Health Service Command at the time, commanded by a two-star general, General Winkler. And I got a call one day from the Surgeon General's office to go to San Antonio and brief General Winkler about my concept, or I say for the most part, it was mine, but I didn't do it without in a vacuum, without a team, but I was sort of left to fill that vacuum. So the concept and how we went about it I'd have to take credit or blame. So I went down and explained it to him and told him what we had and how we had it configured. A surgeon, an anesthesia, ER physician, or a PA and a PA, a surgical PA type situation, and we had these teams, and we had them equipped with more than what a medic would have in the field, and we would be able to render, the the trauma life support type things in a more forward situation. And I think that I went down there maybe twice. It might have been just once. I can't remember, but I briefed General Pixley about it, and then later the other Surgeon Generals as they came along. But I made a video about the forward surgical team concept, and I guess I don't know where the term forward surgical. I guess that came out of this rather than an augmentation package. I said, well, it's really a forward surgical team, and I did use that I told one of our PAs was talking one time, and I told him, I said, Larry, we're not going to do neurosurgery in the back of a deuce and a half. I used that term over and over again because that wasn't the concept. And at the time, because my feeling was it was very important for the people who were involved with these units to be clinicians. They needed to be actively involved in taking care of patients. They didn't need to be assigned necessarily to a unit where they weren't doing anything, clinically. I'm talking about intubating, doing the surgical stuff. They offered me the ability to uh, be assigned to the unit Delta, and I said, my you want me to be a surgeon, when you need me, and
Yeah.
so we kept that. Ultimately, Delta did get their own primary care, and that was a lot of that was to do with, you know, as they got bigger and bigger and bigger, families and, that the deployments and, all of that better than me. But the bottom line is that initial concept is my understanding that they took that and General Winkler and whomever the powers that be liked the idea and started to evolve, and now it's a very sophisticated process. I was retired for 3.5 years, and I got recalled to Desert Storm, and I got assigned to the 274th Forward Surgical Team out of Fort Bragg. You talk about full circle.
Yeah, that's very special. And reflecting back, you're right. I mean, Kevin O'Connor, who's now the president's physician, was the primary care. He was out at Delta and the lead medic out there for a while. Folks like Phil Volpe, a dear friend of mine, the foundation you led. A lot of the things you described are things that I know that Phil implemented along the way, and surgery in the back of a helicopter, surgery in the back of a C-130, et cetera, et cetera. It's very special. And then, as with most things, what starts in the special ops community will evolve into the conventional force, and that's, I think, how we got to where we are today. And so, thank you for that. I do want to ask you about something that's a little related, but tell us about the Long Commission and your role in gleaning lessons learned from the Beirut
Well,
Marine Corps barracks bombing.
Well, it's a long, so I'd probably still be at Fort Bragg or Fort Liberty, but my wife at the time became a member of Mr. Reagan's medical staff. She was a ICU nurse, and so she got the job, and so I started to look for a job, and I ended up at Walter Reed doing a fellowship at Johns Hopkins, and then going to Walter Reed to be the director of the residency and whatnot. I'd been there not very long after my fellowship, and I get a call from Pete Schumacher, who was one of the squadron commanders and who I had developed a very close and still have a close personal relationship with. And he had been tasked for the Long Commission, and they needed somebody well, as he put it, somebody I trust to look at the medical aspects of the Beirut bombing. So I became the there was a Navy captain that was an anesthesiologist that was also part of that medical thing. But I ended up going everywhere the in my investigation, if you will, in civilian clothes. I went everywhere that the wounded went, and including into Beirut, and it was quite an eye opener, and it reinforced something that I had said for a long time, that, we do all these mass casualty drills, and no one ever thinks about what happens if the mass casualties are the medical staff. In this case, the entire Marine contingent were killed. They were in the basement of the barracks where it exploded. The corpsmen, I think there were some that were outside at the time of the explosion, but I believe it killed the doctor. It's been a while since I reviewed it, but Anyway, that was certainly one of the things that I preached when I came home, is that, that when I came back from this, it was very interesting to see how that all evolved. And here again, in this case, there were so many deaths that the casualty load was relatively light because they were all dead. For me, it was more interesting because I was in on all the briefings and I was just, way down on the pecking order of the Long Commission. But it was very interesting to listen to the investigation and the bomb experts and the rules of engagement and all of the things that we don't normally think about. So it was a it was a learning experience from that standpoint too. And in general, the evacuation and the care of the wounded was amazingly it was amazingly good. They flew in. Some of them went to Akatiri, which is an island off there, and they is it. But what I said, what's going to happen sometime is we're going to have a big thing like this. And they wait till all of the medevac helicopters and in this case the Nightingales or the C-141s come in to get everything, and then they take them out too. And that's going to happen someday.
So thank you for that. So you retired as a colonel in 1987 and took a position with the Houston Clinic in Columbus, Georgia. Many of us are I never had the opportunity to train there, but I've had good friends who spent time there doing sports medicine and orthopedics and others. During that time, you were asked by General Jack Vesey, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I find this just fascinating that you got to do this, but to make trips to Vietnam to facilitate resolution of our POW MIA issues. Could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
I've sometimes likened my life to Forrest Gump. I've been on the periphery of a lot of things, but not actively involved in it. But General Vesey, when he was the chairman, I ended up operating on his knee. He had a problem, and we became doctor patients, but we became very good friends over the period of time. And that he was the chairman, and he retired from the chairmanship, and I had been retired, about 4 months. It was August of '87, and this is kind of a funny story. So I get a call. I'm in the operating room, and it's somebody from the Surgeon General's office wanting to know where I'm going to be at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I said, I'll be in clinic. So then I get a call from the commanding general at Walter Reed, where are you going to be at 3 o'clock, same place, going to be in clinic. And this is going through my scrub nurse. And then I got a call from the secretary. I think it was maybe it was Secretary Marsh. I can't remember. No, I don't. It wasn't Secretary Marsh, but the secretary's office at same thing. Finally, they said General Vesey wants to talk to you. So he called, and I knew he'd been to Vietnam. And I said, General, I said, welcome. I guess you've been back from Vietnam, or are you still in Vietnam? And he said, well, Carl, he said, I just came from the White House, and the president and I have a favor to ask of you. And those were his exact words. I said, well, okay, I'll do it. He said, you don't want to know what it is? I said, listen to what you just said, sir. Two of my real significant idols or role models, whatever you want to call Ronald Reagan and Jack Vesey, who's people I wish I were more like, asked you to do something. So he outlined this, and I was his only, I think the reason I got the job was because I was the only orthopedist he knew. And when he went over there to Vietnam, they went over on a quote humanitarian issue, and the Vietnamese threw it right back and said, well, you want us to be humanitarian, but you don't care about us as humanitarian. What the U.S. doesn't do anything for us humanitarian. He said, well, give me an example. And the example they gave was prosthetics for amputees. We have all of these amputees from the war. He said, well, okay, we'll look into that. So I went over as an unofficial official delegation, and it was quite a stir because apparently, this is General Vesey telling me, he said, when I threw out your name, everybody's going, who the hell's this guy? Whoa, 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 whoa. we can't send him over there. We can't commit the government to, anything. But anyway, it all worked out. I made, I think, 3 trips, and I was going about every 6 weeks, and I trying to build a practice. So the 4th or 5th trip, I brought in Colonel Bruce Van Dam, who was at Walter Reed at the time, and he kind of took my place. But the initial, all the discussions were to try to get the ball rolling for getting our MIAs and POWs back. And it turned out that it was probably the springboard ultimately for the resolution and the recognition of Vietnam.
Right. The 2 countries coming back together and reestablishing relations. Sir, just a couple of things you've said. I'll just highlight the fact you took great care of individuals that formed a relationship, which developed credibility and trust. That's something we as medics, that's kind of how it works. Your point about when you said what you're really looking for is a clinician, you want me to be an orthopedic surgeon. So what you want me to do is stay in the hospital and stay clinically busy so that when you ask me to do something in an operational setting, I can do that. And that is certainly absolutely true today, and something that we must continue to focus on. I thank you for that.
I used to say that if you can't do it in a controlled environment, you sure are not going to be able to get it in an uncontrolled environment unless you are extremely lucky.
Right, exactly. And those repetitions in a controlled environment give you the background to be able to flex off in an unconventional environment. Exactly. Yeah. You retired in 2016, I guess, for the 2nd or 3rd time or somewhere along in there. And after you were at the Houston Clinic for about three decades in private practice, but you continue to serve and you continue to volunteer. Could you kind of give us a snapshot of some of the things you're doing now?
Early on, when I first got to Columbus, I decided that I was going to be involved in a couple of things. One was the Arthritis Foundation, because I did arthritis surgery, and the other was the National Infantry Museum, which at the time really didn't exist, and I became involved in it. And to this day, I'm the vice chairman of the board and have been sort of like Idi Amin. I don't know if this is for life or what, but it's been about 9 or 10 or 12 years now that I've done that, and it's not a lot of work, but it's a wonderful institution. And if anybody gets a chance to come and see this it's more than a museum; it's a living educational experience. And I was just there today for a memorial service for somebody one of our state senators that helped us get the funding, and this was very helpful in getting it done. I made the statement that there are very few things in life that exceed your expectations, and the National Infantry Museum happens to be one of mine. And I invite anybody if they want to come, and I'll get them a VIP tour, and it's really an experience. So.
Yeah, well, thank you. I've been twice. You're absolutely correct. It's a truly remarkable, and it's more than a museum. You get a feel for it. The history there is truly remarkable. It's fairly well done. If I get a chance to go again, I may call you up.
Well, you definitely, if you get a chance to go again, you better come stay with me, and then we'll go together.
That sounds like a plan. We'll do that. Sir, in closing, if you were to talk to a young person who is thinking about joining the military, specifically military medicine, what would you share with them?
Well, when I got out of the military, people said, "Do you miss the Army?" And I said, "I don't really think I miss the Army. What I miss are the soldiers, the relationships that I had with my colleagues, completely different than in private practice. At least for me, it was. When I was at all of the military hospitals and, your clinics, you were there with the general surgeons, the urologists, the neurosurgeons, the internists, the family practitioners. They're right around the corner. You had a lot of interaction with them. In private practice, everybody's going in different directions.
Right.
And I would say that is a very unique situation in military medicine, and that young people should take that and embrace it, because it will pay dividends in the years. Those relationships, as you highlighted, are really important. And the soldiers, for the most part, were very motivated to get back and do what they wanted to do. And what y'all have done subsequent to when I was in, a guy got injured, they put him in the holding company, and you turn a good soldier into a bad soldier because of a bad situation, and boarding people out that had tremendous experience. And now there's all these programs to harness that kind of knowledge, and that's important too. But taking care of soldiers was just a lot of fun, and highlight, and story after story, funny, and most of them funny. And it really it's a very unique situation that you can't really find very many places.
It's truly a blessing, and I think you've summed it up very well. I think you speak for many, if not all of us, who've had the opportunity to serve in military medicine, and so thank you for that. And in closing, our WarDocs guest has been Colonel Retired Carl Savory. Please visit WarDocsPodcast.com to learn more about this amazing leader, innovator. You can read his full bio and see pictures from his remarkable career. Dr. Savory, I thank you for being a guest on WarDocs. We thank you for your decades of service to our nation.
Thank you, and it's an honor to be here, Jeff.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you, and may God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to WarDocs. We sure hope you enjoyed it. WarDocs is a nonprofit organization supported by donations from listeners like you. Please follow and subscribe to our show on whatever platform you consume your podcasts, and rate and review this episode, and share the show with your contacts on social media. Find out more information about our show, our guests, and how to become a member of Team WarDocs on WarDocsPodcast.com. Thank you for your support. If you like war stories and medical drama, WarDocs has you covered. Spread the word.